We see a very negative bar. We can see we're kind of rejected from that downward trend line and are now testing the 21 EMA. And this is where things get really interesting. This is where the 21 EMA setup, the pullback setup, really comes into play. We have a promising stock in a leading theme that is a recent IPO that has high potential, that is growing very fast. You can see earnings surprises right here. You can see acceleration quarter to quarter. Here we earned 65 million in revenue, then 76 and 113. So not only is it growing really fast, but it's in a leading theme and just transitioned from a longer term basing period to now an uptrend and is having its first pullback to the 21 EMA. This type of day is, again, what I call a positive expectation breaker, where the stock is a strong, high potential stock overall, is showing relative strength. We're in a relative strength phase. We just broke out of this base here. We're having our first pullback to the 21 EMA. We closed negatively, and instead of falling through to the downside, which would be the expectation, we instead positively break those expectations by gapping up, holding, and closing strong. A breakout through this level is often just the start, and I'll repeat, just the start of a longer term uptrend. Here in this area, all these early entry points we're talking about are still within the institutional due diligence phase. Often the stock really doesn't get going until we break out on volume through this key high. And if we take a look at the volume, this is the highest volume since the IPO week, and that's significant. And another sign that this bottom formation was kind of being put in and the stock could transition from a downtrend is a key edge that we look for at TraderLion, and that is increasing average volume. If you take a look here at this moving average, we see it gradually increase during the bottom formation and as it starts this uptrend. And this is a hallmark edge that you see in bottoming IPOs. You know, going back in history, the past 10, 15 years, almost all of them show this edge where average volume increases as the stock bottoms and starts to transition into an uptrend. This is where ALAB really shows itself and its potential. Look at this volume. This is the highest volume ever. That's a key edge, again, that we look for in terms of finding the biggest winners. And here we get a nice gap up on large volume. All right, hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. Today is going to be a really good one. We're going to dive into a case study of ALAB, which was one of the top performers of 2024. It was featured in our 2024 TraderLion model book, and you can pick up your copy of this excellent resource down below. We walk through 30 of the best stocks of last year, discuss entry points, sell rules, fundamentals, key metrics to watch, all of that. And the whole point of this is to study previous big winners so you can catch future ones by applying that same blueprint over and over, which we discuss in that model book. Again, the link to that is down below. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to dive deep into ALAB and its trend from last year, where it had a really nice, almost 200% move from the key setup that we'll be discussing today, a positive expectation breaker off the 21 EMA. And we're actually going to discuss kind of 5 different phases of this stock, looking back all the way to its IPO move. We'll discuss the IPO boom phase, the IPO bust phase, the bottoming action here, this strong trend, and now the current phase it's in, which is this pullback area where it's potentially setting up for another run, but right now is just kind of best just left on a watch list and waiting for that next entry setup. But this is going to be a really good video. We're going to discuss a lot of actionable tips and strategies that you can apply to any future IPO. And this is going to be a lot of fun. So stick with me. And if you do enjoy this, go ahead and leave a like down below. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. And let's go ahead and dive right in. So first things first, we're going to definitely focus on this uptrend here and different setups and entry points you could have applied along the way to enter this very strong trend. But I think everything has to start from the very beginning. Why would this stock be on your radar in the first place? And that begins with the IPO. So first things first, you can see right after the IPO, we see immediate strong demand, large volume as well. This immediately was a pretty liquid stock. If we take a look at kind of the average volume, it's about 1.5 million, and the stock's about 50 to up here, around $90 a share. So that's actually very liquid for a stock. And these are the type of stocks that institutions can actually start positions in early on within their life cycles, which basically leads to greater potential that they could go on a super strong move like we see later on. But basically, all that being said, a nice liquid IPO is something to be aware of, to be focused on, especially if it's in a theme that's really thriving in the market. And this obviously is related to AI databases because they build these special kind of wiring connectors that basically increase the efficiency of an entire database, which can be extremely beneficial for all the stocks and investing into this infrastructure. So all that being said, this is basically a pick and shovel play on the AI theme. As I mentioned, you see immediate demand. There is the potential for a short-term trade in here right off the IPO. Sometimes that is the case, sometimes it isn't. But for me personally, what I like to do is wait for the IPO base to set up with these recent IPOs. And that basically forms where we get the first pullback and basing structure. Here, the sets up right here. You can see a pullback down from the high around 95. We set up this nice base. We actually undercut it and reclaim it, this key low here, and set up the potential for up the right side move of this IPO base. And let's zoom in so we don't get biased by that price action over here on the right hand side. This to me is definitely the first opportunistic buy point. I think this is definitely actionable here for a swing trade or a day trade. We see again a start of the move out the right hand side. It undercuts and reclaims this level right here. We have a nice inside day. It pushes higher right near the 21 EMA area, goes tight for 2 days. RMV, which basically is a measure of the recent volatility of the stock, goes to zero, signaling that there is a nice range that's being built. And then we see a breakout through this high. That would be the actionable pivot point here for this IPO base. We see a strong breakout not through this high, but also this one, and a very constructive move that looks to be approaching this IPO base high. And the best IPO base moves break out from that IPO base and just trend for a few weeks. Often IPOs ultimately do end up rolling over and needing a longer term digestion period, as we'll see later on with ALAB. But this one couldn't quite break out. It goes tight for 2 days, which looks constructive, but then this is where the expectation breaker happens. And if it did enter near this this breakout here through this high, and let me actually go ahead and draw in that pivot right here, which also pretty much lines up with the high of this base as well. So there's some nice confluence there. If you did enter right through this level, you can see that this would probably test your costs. And if you did move your stop up to break even, because this was about a 20% move already off the lows, likely you're stopped up on this day. And if you're a fast trader, you're likely getting stopped out right near the open as it undercuts this low. And that would still lead to a really nice trade, about 8% in just a matter of days. That's great for swing traders. But for them, this situation is over. We do see upside reversals, the potential for another move higher. I would be watching this pivot right here through this high. We see a gap up, but no fall through to the upside, and it kind of falls back into this range, and we go tight again, and we start leaking below. And then this really tells me, hey, this base either needs a lot more time, or simply this won't really have a nice IPO base run. And you can see, instead of being above the 21 EMA and kind of using that as support, as it did right here, we're now stuck below the 21 EMA, and that becomes resistance. You see this fade off highs, as well. And we do actually try to pop back through. And again, this might be actionable through these highs because it does set up this range right here. RMV went to zero again, showing that the range is being formed. And this is why I love RMV, because often it allows you to it tells you objectively whether a stock is coiled enough to lead to a nice move like we had right here. This is up about 7%. But again, we don't get follow through. And that's really what we want to see when it comes to a successful breakout, is not just strong action on the first day, but strong follow through the next day, the day after that, successive strong moves upwards, breaking through more and more pivots into ideally blue skies and all-time highs. Here we get the opposite. We see a reversal down, again telling you that either the stock or your timing isn't quite right, and likely this would just be a scratch trade. So far we've had potentially a successful, albeit not super profitable trade here, and then this is probably a scratch trade, or maybe even a small loss if you were managing your risk tightly. And you can see we leak back below the 21 EMA, and this is really where things get interesting. Again, we set up tightly right near the 21 EMA, but instead of gapping and going and really testing these highs right here, we see a downside reversal back through 21 EMA, really showing that just at this moment the stock isn't quite right, and the expectation that we maybe get a gap and go move is false, and instead we get a downside reversal, negative outside day, leading to the start of the longer term trend to the downside, which is the IPO bust phase. So again, this stock had a short-term IPO boom phase right after the IPO. It didn't quite have a nice move like some stocks do after it forms an IPO base and moves up higher from that, and just kind of transitioned pretty quickly to a significant decline that led to the basing period that then yielded the really strong move that we'll focus on here in 2024. But I just want to show real quickly Zim here as a good example of how powerful IPO boom phase can be. This was in the shipping space. You can see it had multiple IPO bases that set up here, continued breakouts, and this advanced from this first IPO base. If we go ahead and measure here, about 100%, 150%, ultimately about 200%. So often stocks can have these really nice moves early on in their life cycle where you can catch shorter term bases along the way, respecting the 21 EMA. But once we undercut the 21 EMA, you do have to be a little bit more careful because most stocks and most IPOs do eventually see a significant decline where they might give everything back that they gained during the IPO boom phase, and hence the term IPO bust. So let's go back to ALAB. All right. So once we've had the start of the IPO bust phase where we see a strong downtrend, what you're really looking for is just a sign of a bottom formation, a transition from momentum to the downside to momentum to kind of transitioning to just going sideways, and eventually the start of momentum transitioning to the upside. Really, that happens when the moving averages catch up to price and we start to see them respecting the moving averages, and those moving averages going flat versus trending down significantly like we see right here. We're below a declining 21, declining 50. You can see these act as resistance along the way, and we really get extended to the downside, undercut this low, which if you've read the life cycle trade, which I'd highly recommend, you can see that most stocks actually undercut this first day low. This one does that. And then the first kind of interesting price action happens down here. Note that, we've gotten about as extended to the downside as we have during this entire move. And we put in a big upside reversal bar where we gapped lower, but instead of falling through to the downside, which would kind of be the case if momentum was going to continue to the downside, we have a very strong close. And there's the potential that this is the key low, that this is the bottom, and we might start, that bottoming formation. So at this point, your mindset is that this is the key low. Again, this isn't necessarily where we're trading a stock unless you're a fast trader and are trading these one-day reversals, because what my mindset is we're looking for swing trades and position trades where the stock is in an uptrend significantly for a long duration. That's where really I try to focus, and this just isn't my game right now. But there are people who like to play these type of reversals. It's just not kind of my specialty. But regardless of what your strategy is, this is the start of a potential bottom formation where for the first time, we're really seeing it get extended to the downside and then seeing a sign of reversal back to the upside. So we're just kind of gathering evidence and saying, hey, maybe this is the start, just the start again of a bottoming phase. And we get one more day of evidence here where, again, we actually gap down, but instead of falling through to the downside, we see another strong bar. This is up about 15% here on the day from the open. And again, we close strongly after being down right here. So this area right now is a potential zone of demand where institutions and larger institutions are stepping in, accumulating shares because they see a long-term future with ALAB. And again, this could be coinciding with where the NVIDIA and semiconductor theme and database theme and AI is really taking hold. And people are now investigating, doing their due diligence on this company, ALAB, and recognizing that it could be a significant player and see a lot of growth because of those macro trends, because of that thematic trend of AI. And that's where the longer term institutions will be doing this research and realizing, hey, let's start building a position in the stock, see where it goes, do more research, and see if it's worth our time and money. And kind of why I'm mentioning this is because, again, the life cycle trade authors termed the first longer term basing period that a stock experiences after its IPO as the institutional due diligence phase, where institutions, again, are doing the research, seeing if a stock is worth, purchasing shares and, worth investigating further to see if it has the potential to be a longer term hold for these large funds that really ultimately move the market. So this type of action, again, is suggesting that accumulation is happening. We're seeing a pickup in volume as well as this price action happens. But the bottom, might be in, it might not. This is just kind of the start of a bottoming formation. Moving on, we see a very negative bar we're right back into that demand zone. So again, if we're gathering evidence, we want to see a stock be supported in this area. Again, that would suggest that institutions have finally decided, based on their valuation models, that, hey, we want to accumulate shares in this area to build that longer term position. So what happens? We see a nice positive expectation breaker. And we're going to discuss the positive expectation breaker a few times in this video, because it is actually a really good entry tactic within the context of an uptrend. Here, it's more of a sign, again, of that bottoming type action where the stock is, transitioning from a large downtrend momentum to just more going sideways, even though the stock is trying to sell off. If it can't sell off, it's got to go sideways or got to go up. So that's what we're looking for here. So again, we see a very negative close, then we see a gap up and strong action. That kind of meets the criteria for a positive expectation breaker. And again, we're starting to see the stock go sideways versus carry on to the downside. The 21 EMA is catching up to price, 50 SMA is still above. So the stock still has a lot of work to do to potentially meet the criteria for a stage 1 base or bottom. But as we can see, the stock goes tight constructively, volumes tapering off, RMV goes down to 0, and tight price action on low volume is a key characteristic to look for that's indicative of institutional accumulation. So along with these big support bars, this type of price action tells you that things might be changing with the stock. And again, this could be the first start of a bottoming formation. We see a pop through this tight range here. The stock again is trying to fight the downward trend, but this can't hold, and we get rejected down at the 21 EMA. And often the first test of a declining 21 EMA, we do see a rejection from that, but it's all about how the stock reacts after that rejection. Does it completely fall apart and undercut these lows and look to continue the downtrend, or do we still kind of hold and see the potential for a higher low to be put in, or a bottom formation to really develop and mature? And ALAB just again kind of goes tight. We're kind of back in this range area, and we're still respecting these lows. These are the key lows to kind of view as, if we undercut them, we might restart the momentum to the downside. But if we hold above them, again, the bottoming type price action might be in, and we could start to look for a transition from a stage 4 decline to a stage 1 into a stage 2 as we break above the moving averages and key resistance levels. So we're seeing strong action, again, just kind of forming a range. We test that 21 EMA again, pop higher. Now we're testing the 50 SMA, but it is still declining at this moment. And just like the 21 EMA, the first test of a declining 50 SMA often is where we meet resistance. And sure enough, we pull back pretty hard. But look again where we find support here. First, it pulls back into this range, and then we pull back all the way into this demand area that we recognized earlier. So it's all about gathering evidence. And we put in this nice upside reversal bar, very low volume here, and we pop immediately back up, again, showing that institutions are kind of stepping in and that the stock is more under accumulation than distribution at this point. And right now, we're kind of seeing the 21 EMA flatline here. We're back at that level, and we have a strong bar right into that level and put in a really nice tight bar here. And bars like this, after significant expansion to the upside, to me are really key, and there's something you really want to be focused on. When we have a really tight bar like this could be an inside day, this could be as it shows here, a little bit of a move higher and then it goes tight. Bars like this with no give back whatsoever are really a sign that breakout was pretty strong, and likely we're going to see reconfirmation to the upside after a little bit of a pause. It's just basically just a consolidation bar. And sure enough, the next day we see fall through to the upside, really breaking through the 21 EMA, and we start to see an RS phase forming here as we try to break above the 21 EMA on the relative strength line. And that's where the longer term moves and great swing trades, great position trades to the long side can occur. So this is where you really want to get interested in the stock. And aggressive swing traders who have been collecting evidence here, or aggressive position traders, might even begin their position on this bar right here and look to add more if it pops through that 50 SMA. We get back to that 50 SMA, we finally pop through, and we start to see that there's kind of key resistance here. And this is where I would start to, maybe draw in a resistance line using this high right here, move that across. We're right at that level. We broke out here, failed it, but this would be kind of the key level to trade against. Moving forward, we see a little bit of pause at that level, and then we get a really nice reconfirmation. So again, if you started your position right here on a pop through the 21 EMA, maybe you added more on this breakout through the key level, and then it paused for 2 tight days, Then we see reconfirmation. This kind of is the re-breakout through this level and could be a point to add as well. But it's not even the main setup we'll be talking about today. So this is still very early on in the life cycle. The stock is still just broken through the 50 SMA, which is actually still declining. But you can start to see all the moving averages curl up under price. And this is something that we point out again and again in the model book. This is called a launchpad setup, where all the moving averages converge under price. And when they expand to the upside and start trending in formation, that's when the best trends happen and the best longer term moves happen. So again, what does this bar remind you of? To me, this reminds me a lot of this bar right here, where we have strong expansion and then we just go tight. So we're expecting continued expansion to the upside. We'll see what happens. We see another tight day. So even though this is kind of wedging higher, because of this is so tight relative to this expansion, to me, it's still a sign that that breakout was pretty strong. However, we are getting a little bit of air above the moving average here. So what might be normal, and this is something you should ask yourself with every bar whenever you're viewing a chart, what would be normal price action? Still, even a retest of this 10 EMA here would still be normal price action as long as it holds above this prior base pivot. What happens? We still kind of trend higher, so we're just kind of trending, acts well. Nice action here where we gap up and reverse down, but we hold above this low and actually hold this close really nicely and ultimately close the day really nicely right near highs. The next day, we get a little bit of hesitation, wide range bar, a little bit wider than the prior day, but we're still above now a rising 10 EMA, a rising 21 EMA, and the 50 SMA has now flatlined. So things are now decidedly transitioning from a basing period, which occurred after the downtrend, to now the start of an uptrend. So even if you're just picking up the stock now and noticing ALAB and noticing the strong growth numbers and all of that, this is still so early on in the trend because we're so far below these previous all-time highs. But it could be a point where you really want to start being focused and looking for a low risk entry at a higher low, at a moving average pullback, some type of setup or entry tactic that you studied going back in history, just like we're doing right now, and recognizing where would be a low risk entry point where I can manage my risk within a few percent and enter with a sizable enough position if I view the stock as a potential leader. And this, of course, had the theme going for it. It had strong growth. It's a recent IPO, which gives it more potential in my mind. And this is kind of the first area transitioning after that longer term basing period into an uptrend where I want to be aggressive and looking to enter a stock to potentially ride a really nice trend and the start of the institutional advance phase. Moving forward, we start to leak below here, but it's just kind of basing out and acting really nicely above the moving averages. We see a test of the 10 EMA, which again is completely normal. It got a little bit extended here from the base. It's now pulling back on lighter volume, still looks pretty constructive. Still pulling back, but a little bit of a fight to the upside, nice upside reversal. Didn't close near highs, but looks pretty good for a potential pullback buy. You can go ahead and draw in a short-term resistance line here and watch that for a break of the short-term downtrend. And let's go to the next bar here. We see a very negative bar. We can see we're kind of rejected from that downward trend line and are now testing the 21 EMA. And this is where things get really interesting. This is where the 21 EMA setup, the pullback setup, really comes into play and where I would become very aggressive as a trader. We have a promising stock in a leading theme that is a recent IPO that has high potential, that is growing very fast. You can see earnings surprises right here. You can see acceleration quarter to quarter. It earned 10%, then 13%, then 23%. Here we earned 65 million in revenue, then 76 and 113. So not only is it growing really fast, but it's in a leading theme and just transitioned from a longer term basing period to now an uptrend and is having its first pullback to the 21 EMA. Often the first pullback to the 21 EMA is a prime spot to build a position because you can manage risk really tightly versus this swing low and are basically looking for respect to that moving average and some type of short-term reversal back to the upside. Here on this bar, if you look closely at this, where do we close? Right near the lows. And if you think about what your expectation would be based on short-term momentum, we're in a pullback, we close near lows. The expectation really is we break lower through this level. So if we don't do that, that would be a positive expectation breaker and a sign that, hey, institutions have stepped back in and are looking to reinvigorate the trend back to the upside. So let's take a look at the next day. And what do we get? We get a gap up, a strong hold of this level, and then a very strong close here. And this high would be a pivot early on in the day would also be actionable from an opening range breakout or some type of gap up entry tactic, whatever you'd like to use. But overall, this type of day is, again, what I call a positive expectation breaker, where the stock is a strong, high potential stock overall. It's showing relative strength. We're in a relative strength phase. We just broke out of this base here. We're having our first pullback to the 21 EMA. We closed negatively, and instead of falling through to the downside, which would be the expectation, we instead positively break those expectations by gapping up, holding, and closing strong. And this would be the day to really get aggressive, build your position up. If you started back here, add to that position. But even if you're starting completely from scratch, you could definitely put on a 10, 15%, even 20% position, managing risk at this low or the 21 EMA. And we take a look, this is around 50. If we measure to the 21 EMA, that's about 4% risk, which is completely reasonable. And you're able to build a pretty sizable position given this. And this is still very, very early, and the stock still has a lot of runway to go. So from this bar, the stock progresses nicely, continues higher the next 2 days, and then we get a gap up. And this isn't the best gap up because it was based on a profit target raise, but they did actually announce a new product here, a new type of switch, their next generation here on this day. So this is based on kind of two different catalysts, the profit target raise, as well as the new switch technology. And if we take a look at the volume, this is the highest volume since the IPO week, and that's significant. And overall, and another sign that this bottom formation was kind of being put in, and the stock could transition from a downtrend, is a key edge that we look for at TraderLion, and that is increasing average volume. If you take a look here at this moving average, we see it gradually increase during the bottom formation and as it starts this uptrend. And this is a hallmark edge that you see in bottoming IPOs. Going back in history, the past 10, 15 years, almost all of them show this edge where average volume increases as the stock bottoms and starts to transition into an uptrend. And this is a sign that the stock is becoming more liquid, that more institutions are getting involved because they see the potential in the name. And so this is a key edge that I definitely want to mention here in this video. And if you look back at Zoom, if you look back at Peloton, a lot of the great IPOs from 2020 where so many did extremely well, this fits this template exactly. But getting back to this volume, this is very big volume and a nice gap. We see about a 15% move. It closes mid-range, but closes very strong if you draw the imaginary low down here. So this is a very strong bar. And if you're in from here, this would be, get you out of cushion immediately. But even if you're not in from here, this type of move, which you could kind of scan for every single day or just kind of sort your screens by percent gain on the day, and you'd see this stock come up. This would be a whole new way to get the stock into your universe, basically discover it for a potential entry point later on. Because I want to remind you guys that we're very far from all-time highs still, and this is still very early on in the life cycle of the stock. So everything we're talking about here, even with this great entry point, is still so early on that there'll be many great entry points, moving average pullbacks, base breakouts, if the stock is going to become a big winner, which it ultimately did. But this gap is very constructive price and volume action. And after this gap, you could use your post-gap entry tactics to build your position or add to an existing position if you added from this 21 EMA pullback. The next day, we see a breakthrough this high volume close as well as this high. Those could both be entry points here, and very strong action, great volume as well. Again, basically the highest since the IPO week. So it's really showing that institutions are becoming more aggressive in their accumulation. They liked what they heard from that new product release, which again is the end factor edge. We're always looking for stocks that are innovating in high demand fields, and that fits the bill for ALAB. And we see very strong action closing right near highs. We see now some natural pullback. This is a more volatile name, but we respect, this low. We respect the 10 EMA, which is the strongest breakouts do, and kind of form a short-term base below this level around 71. Here we get tight again. RMV goes down to 0. We could basically draw a short-term downward trend line here. If I can draw that, and you could watch for breakthrough highs for an add if you're being pretty aggressive. Here we get a nice outside day. This could be the potential to add to your position. But the next day, you might get shaken out at this low. It does hold the 10 EMA, so it's acting completely normal. But, it's just acting a little bit volatile. And earnings are coming up at this point, as we'll see in just a second. Here we get a slight rally. The stock does ultimately push out of this nice tight range. but doesn't make too much progress before earnings, and right before earnings does ultimately leak below. So any ads in this area likely would have been stop outs. Okay, then we have earnings, and this is where ALAB really shows itself and its potential. Look at this volume. This is the highest volume ever. That's a key edge again that we look for in terms of finding the biggest winners. If you look back at highest volume evers, there's a key signature that can really ignite a trend and just point you towards a great swing trade or position trade. And here we get a nice gap up on large volume. We see, and this is reported on November 4th. If we take a look at this, we see a beat on EPS. We see a beat on revenue as well. That's the best possible scenario. And we see very strong price action, huge volume coming in. And again, institutions are really evaluating the stock and deciding, hey, not only do I want to add, I have to add based on the prospects that I view this stock has. So this could be actionable using early entry tactics on the gap up, or the next day as well. We had a gap down and strong close as well, showing this accumulation. And all this is happening near a pretty key level here, this IPO high. And a breakout through this level is often just the start, and I'll repeat, just the start of a longer term uptrend. Here in this area, all these early entry points we're talking about are still within the institutional due diligence phase. Often the stock really doesn't get going until we break out on volume through this key high. So ultimately, ALAB pulls back and sets up a nice downward trend line break. And I actually added on this day here personally. I bought on this day as well and added on this day as it broke the downward trend line. I love tight consolidations that occur right below this key IPO high. And you can see the nice constructive tight pullback we see here with ALAB, volume declining, RMV going to zero. And then we see a break through that level. Nice upside reversal here. You can manage risk at the low of the day. That's what I did. And you're off to the races. We see a re-breakout through that key IPO high and nice follow through. And throughout, it kind of resets, tests this level, supports it. We don't actually touch it here, but we close off lows and then set up really nice 2 tight days. Again, RMV signal goes tight, goes to zero right here. You could draw another pivot right through these highs. Pivots are basically whenever I see a tight range where multiple highs are around the same spot. And this could be an add point here. And I actually did add here on this day. Really nice breakout. And throughout this, we're seeing expansion up, go tight, expansion up, go tight, expansion up, go tight. This is a hallmark of a strong uptrend and a stock that's respecting the 10 EMA during the strongest trends and the 21 EMA overall. You can see going back that we broke through the 21 EMA back here, and we haven't broken it despite the fact that the stock has run at this point about 185%. And the strongest stocks, when they break through the 21 EMA, they can run for hundreds of percent without testing that level, which is why it's a great place to put your sell stop and kind of trail your position against. But regardless, we got ALAB. Again, it breaks higher, goes tight, continues to break higher, go tight, and just trend above that 21 EMA, doing nothing wrong. And let me go ahead and reshape here. There we go. And you can see we just respect that 10 EMA and 21 EMA throughout this move. There's some wiggles and jiggles along the way, but everything looks pretty good. And, whenever you get about this far above the 10 EMA, we start to pull back. So about 11%, again, we start pulling back and everything looks good until we get to about right here. So if we saw a stock pull back to 21 EMA again, nice respect for that level, moved up, tested this prior high, but instead of being able to break out through that, we see a big reversal down, breaking below the 10 EMA. And this is the widest range in quite some time. Definitely the most negative bar that we've had in quite some time. And, if you've got a position from lower, you're still up about 40, 50, 60%. So this type of bar wouldn't cause you to sell your entire position, but it's more about a change in mindset that, hey, you might want to be a little bit more on guard and watch for further base building out here. We see a tight day. So again, just like the tight days to the upside where it's a consolidation, we're seeing a bad negative bar and then a tight day, watching for reconfirmation to the downside. And we just start kind of leaking below the 21 EMA and ultimately are just kind of building a base here against the 50 SMA. So things are looking good. But then again, we see a big upside reversal, but no follow through to the upside back through that 20 EMA. Instead, we get basically a negative bar below the 50 SMA. And this is the first time we've broken below now the 21 EMA for 2 closes, which could be a sell signal, as well as the 50 SMA during this entire move. So if you are as more of a swing trader, likely you're letting go of your position in this area. And if you're a position trader, even with a good profit, you might be letting go half or a quarter and just being a little bit more proactive with your selling and just being ready for some type of further basing. But, overall, the stock's not doing anything wrong. Then we get a kind of black swan event, the deep sea gap down. And this is a negative bar. But I want to remind you, if you're a swing trader and you bought in these areas, you're probably selling as it breaks at 21 EMA and not even experiencing this. But a position trader, you'd want to be holding for the bigger move, the longer term move, and you are likely getting hit with this type of bar here. And all the best stocks during their major moves will have some bad days along the way. And this is definitely a very bad day. Gap lower, fall through to the downside. Nvidia, SMCI, all the big semiconductor stocks and AI related stocks got hit on this day. And you just have to be proactive in the morning. You have to decide, is there a line in the sand that, I don't want to cross and sell my position, or am I going to hold and look to see how it recovers? You basically have to have a rule for yourself. How are you going to handle black swan gap downs just like this? Me personally, I'll kind of watch the opening range, and if it just undercuts that and trends down, I'll cut the position. I'd rather be out of a stock than in a stock during a negative move like this. So even though you experience a gap down, it might recover without you. If it does recover, I can always buy it back. No harm done. But I want to avoid the potential for a bad day turning into a terrible day and really setting me back. Because even on this gap down, you're only back to kind of this add-on point here. And all this is at a profit. All of that is protected. And if you're down here, you still got a great profit to deal with here. But overall, when a bar like this happens, where again, on very large volume, the close of that bar becomes really significant. And the reason being is on a large bar like this with huge volume, institutions are likely really in control and setting that close. So just like the high volume close on a gap up can be an entry point where it can be a pivot later on, the close right here could be a spot to watch for potential support, potential upside reversal at that level, or if it falls to the downside, a sign that, hey, the momentum is really getting reinvigorated to the downside and I want to step aside and wait for a whole new base to be built. So let's see what happens here. All right, so look at what happened. This close was protected. We saw no fall through to the downside. Instead, we had another positive expectation breaker. So we've seen about kind of three key ones here during this move here, where we have a very negative bar, negative close in the bottom quartile of the bar, and then we have a gap up, hold, and strong action thereafter. And these type of gap downs are actually something I'm probably going to do a study on. I've collected examples, but haven't done kind of a formal look at this. But this type of action where we hold and don't undercut this low or this close that much can actually be a strong entry point. So that's something I'm going to look into in the future for potential swing trade. Nevertheless, we rally into the declining 10 EMA. What happens the first time we run into declining 10 EMAs or 21 EMAs or 50 SMAs? Likely there's resistance, we pull back, but we actually have a nice upside reversal. So again, there's some sign of accumulation during this negative action. And it just looks like we're kind of forming a pretty deep base, about 45%. But we are seeing the 21 EMA now transition to the downside. And remember this IPO bust phase, stocks can trend below declining 21 EMA for quite some time, just like they can trend above it for quite some time as well. So you want to be on guard when we are below that 21 EMA, but maybe on the lookout for a potential higher low for the start of a move up the right-hand side of the base. Again, we run to a declining 21 EMA here. We reverse downwards, have a very negative bar here. And as of this moment, we're still below all the declining moving averages and are actually back below this IPO high that we set back in this area. So currently, and we're kind of in the last phase here, we're just kind of basing. This low and this close are still pretty significant. We actually saw upside reversal off of this close here, and I'll actually often set alerts right at this level. But right now, it's just kind of do not touch, but still a stock that you want to be watching for a potential revival of the longer term uptrend, because it's had a really nice move off the lows and now it's just kind of forming its kind of second major base in its life cycle. And if it does move up the right hand side of the lows, pop back through that 21 EMA, that moving average kind of transitions from downtrend to flat to now increasing and prices above it and sets up tight areas above that. That's where I would want to be acting on potential entry points here with ALAB. But for now, it's just kind of forming a potential higher low here, but stuck below a declining 21 EMA and below now a declining 50 SMA. So this could form out a base. If we kind of look at how this could be symmetrical, it might take quite some time out until even March before it starts kind of moving up the right-hand side and even test these all-time highs. But right now, we don't even know if that's the case. This could just kind of retest the 21 EMA, reverse down, and keep making lower highs and lower lows and start a downtrend. We don't know what's going to happen, but we know what it's going to look like if the stock's going to transition back into an uptrend, where we'll see positive expectation breakers, upside reversals, higher lows form. We'll see stock go quiet and tight and then start forming higher lows as we go and get back above those moving averages. So this is what you're looking for now to apply as a template to see if there is the potential for another trade down in the future. This is still a very young stock. The growth expectations are very strong. So again, still a high potential name that's worth watching, but for long side growth, swing or position traders, it's just not actionable just yet. And we have to wait for our setups to appear. But overall, that's my run through of ALAB. Hopefully you picked up a few useful tidbits. Let me know any additional observations you made looking at this chart down below. Were there other setups that I may have missed that you would have acted upon? Let me know down below in the comment section. Also, if you have any questions, let me know as well. I'd love to answer as many as I can. And if this was helpful, again, go ahead and leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel, and definitely also pick up our model book from this year, which this is featured in. And you'll see, a whole host of other annotations that we made on this name. And again, 30 other greatest winning stocks from last year. There's so many excellent ones to study. And we really go in depth into not only the technicals here, but like I said, the fundamental theme behind why a stock like this makes a move like this, which is actually almost more important than looking at setups and looking at the different entry tactics, because we want to apply a template from these greatest winning stocks to the future, and the fundamentals are a huge part of that process. So thanks again for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Check out the model book down below. It's linked in the first line of the description. Definitely pick up your copy. Hundreds of people have already gotten it and given us great feedback, so definitely go ahead and join them and order yours today. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in future videos. Take care.